Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his navy blue suit as he walked through the airport terminal. His polished shoes clicked lightly against the tiled floor. He carried a small leather briefcase and a sleek black laptop bag, but his mind was busy with thoughts of the upcoming meeting. Today, he was flying to a city where a critical business deal awaited him, one that could shape the future of his company. His skin, warm brown in tone, reflected the bright airport lights. He had always been proud of his heritage and the journey he had taken to reach this point. Success had not come easily. It was built on long nights of work, countless sacrifices, and a firm belief that he could change the world in his own way. As Marcus approached the boarding gate, he felt a sense of calm confidence. Airline staff smiled and greeted him politely. He handed over his ticket and identification, expecting the usual smooth check-in. But then, the flight attendant hesitated. Her polite smile seemed uncertain. "Sir," she said, glancing at her screen, "first-class seating is, she paused, looking away for a moment. "Actually, you'll need to sit in economy." Marcus blinked. For a moment, the words did not register. He had booked first class months ago. Everything had been confirmed. He opened his mouth to respond, but the attendant's polite tone suggested there was nothing he could do. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," he said quietly, forcing a calmness he didn't fully feel. He could feel the stares of other passengers as he walked past the first-class cabin, his steps firm despite the discomfort rising in him. Sitting in the economy section, Marcus adjusted his seat and placed his briefcase beside him. He tried to focus on the presentation he had prepared for his meeting, but his mind kept drifting back to the incident. It was more than a matter of seating, it was about respect. Even as a successful CEO, he realized that some people still made assumptions based on appearance. A young woman seated nearby glanced at him and smiled politely. Marcus returned the smile, though his heart still carried the sting of the earlier denial. Around him, passengers were settling in. Some chatted quietly, others scrolled through their phones. The hum of the airplane and the soft rustle of seat belts filled the air. Marcus tried to focus on the upcoming meeting, reviewing slides and notes on his laptop. But every few minutes, his gaze wandered toward the first-class cabin. He noticed the flight attendants moving gracefully among passengers, serving drinks and snacks. They laughed softly with some travelers, and the scene seemed normal except he knew what had happened just moments before. A flash of anger rose, but Marcus controlled it. He had always believed in calm action rather than reaction. He reminded himself that dignity mattered more than immediate satisfaction. His career had been built on measured decisions and careful judgment. Reacting in anger now would not help, even though part of him wanted to stand up and demand what was rightfully his. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Marcus fastened his seat belt and leaned back slightly, trying to calm the thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed the other passengers' families, business people, students, all preparing for the journey ahead. He wondered how many of them had faced similar moments of unfair treatment, times when they were judged or overlooked for no real reason. As the engines roared to life, Marcus felt a mixture of determination and resolve. He decided that this experience would not define him. Instead, he would observe and act wisely when the moment came. He opened his notebook and began to write down ideas, not just for the meeting, but also for ways he could address situations like this in the future. The plane lifted into the sky, and Marcus watched through the small window as the airport terminal grew smaller below him. Clouds stretched endlessly in the horizon, and the sunlight reflected softly off the airplane's wings. There was a sense of freedom up here, away from the small injustices of the moment. Yet, the experience lingered in his mind, reminding him that fairness and respect were things worth fighting for, not through anger, but through action. Around him, the cabin crew moved efficiently, unaware of the thoughts running through Marcus's mind. Some passengers glanced at him curiously, sensing the quiet strength in his presence. He gave a small, polite nod to a woman passing by with a tray of drinks, and she smiled in return. Small gestures, he thought, could sometimes mean more than words. For Marcus, the journey was only beginning. Not the flight, but the process of ensuring that respect and dignity were recognized, no matter where he went or who he encountered. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, imagining the boardroom where his meeting awaited him. The business challenges, the negotiations, and the decisions were all important, but so was the lesson he was learning in the air today. The flight continued smoothly, and Marcus opened his laptop once more. He typed notes with precision, focusing on his work while also planning carefully for the moments ahead. This was not just about a seat on an airplane, it was about making a statement quietly, firmly, and wisely. As the first hour of the flight passed, Marcus felt a sense of calm settle over him. The initial sting of denial had not disappeared, but it had transformed into determination. He knew that in life, challenges came in many forms, sometimes in small gestures like this, sometimes in larger ones. How one responded, he believed, was what truly defined character. With his eyes on the horizon and his mind clear, Marcus leaned back in his seat and prepared for the journey ahead, not just to his meeting, but to the moment when he would take action, demonstrating the quiet power of dignity, respect, and fairness. Marcus leaned back in his economy seat, trying to make himself comfortable. The space was tighter than he was used to, and he could feel the difference immediately. First class always offered room to stretch, quiet, and a sense of ease. But today, he would not let discomfort dominate his thoughts. He reminded himself that his strength came not from comfort, but from patience, observation, and action. Around him, passengers were settling in for the flight. A mother gently rocked her toddler to sleep, and a businessman checked his emails on a tablet. Some students chatted quietly, excited for a trip. Marcus noticed them all but did not speak, letting the moment unfold naturally. He had learned long ago that silent observation often revealed more than confrontation. He opened his laptop and glanced over the slides for his meeting. The graphics, the numbers, and the strategy were all polished, ready to impress the clients waiting for him. But even as he reviewed the material, his mind returned to the incident at the boarding gate. The denial of the first-class seat was more than a mistake or a misunderstanding. It carried a deeper message about assumptions and how people sometimes judge others without reason. Marcus remembered the polite smile of the attendant. Her hesitation had seemed small, almost casual, but he knew the meaning behind it. Small actions, he thought, often carried the largest weight. He could feel a quiet fire inside him, not anger, but a sense of responsibility. He had earned his success, and no one's ignorance should diminish that. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Marcus observed the flight attendants in first class. They moved gracefully among the passengers, offering drinks and answering questions with warm smiles. At first, he thought about ignoring them, pretending that the incident never happened. But then he noticed subtle behaviors, the way they avoided eye contact with him earlier, the faint smirk of one attendant as she passed by. These small details built up in his mind, reminding him that fairness and respect were still things worth standing up for. Marcus took a deep breath and closed his laptop for a moment. He leaned back and looked out the window at the endless sky. The clouds were soft, white, and seemingly infinite. There was a certain peace in the scene, but he could not let it distract him completely. Life often presented moments where patience and timing were crucial, and he knew this was one of them. Acting too soon or too emotionally could lessen the impact of what he wanted to achieve. Next to him, a young woman with a light brown complexion smiled politely and offered to help him adjust his tray table. Marcus thanked her, appreciating the small act of kindness. It reminded him that while some people acted out of ignorance or prejudice, others offered support and goodwill without hesitation. These moments kept hope alive and reminded him why he valued fairness so deeply. He opened his laptop again and started drafting an email, though he did not intend to send it immediately. It was a message to himself, a record of what had happened and how he felt about it. Writing helped him organize his thoughts. Respect, he typed, is not something to demand angrily. It is something to uphold wisely and consistently. Actions speak louder than words, but timing makes those actions meaningful. As the flight continued, Marcus noticed passengers stealing glances at the first-class cabin. Some seemed curious, others quietly judgmental. He wondered if any of them had witnessed the brief moment at the boarding gate when he had been denied his seat. Did they feel uncomfortable? Did they understand what had happened? He did not need recognition, but he knew the moment mattered not just for himself, but for anyone who had faced similar treatment in silence. A gentle voice over the intercom announced the in-flight service. The flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, but Marcus noticed a subtle difference in their demeanor compared to the first-class service he had expected. He observed quietly, taking note of every detail: the way drinks were offered, the subtle avoidance of his gaze, the faint smile that seemed slightly forced. These were small clues, yet they added to his understanding of the situation. Marcus did not react outwardly. He sat calmly, but his mind worked actively. He considered options for addressing the incident once the plane was in the air. Patience and clarity were his allies. He wanted to handle the situation in a way that emphasized respect, dignity, and accountability. Acting impulsively might feel satisfying momentarily, but it would not achieve the impact he desired. As the hours passed, Marcus reflected on his journey to this point in life. He had faced countless challenges, from small misunderstandings to large-scale business obstacles. Each had required him to balance emotion with reason, patience with action. Today was another test, not of business skill, but of personal strength and character. He glanced once more at the first-class cabin, where the attendants continued their service. The experience had not dampened his spirit, instead, it sharpened it. Marcus knew that when the time came, he would act not out of anger, but out of a commitment to fairness. He had learned that true power lay in measured, thoughtful response, and he intended to demonstrate that quietly but firmly. The sun outside began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Marcus watched the colors reflect off the clouds and the airplane's wings. The beauty of the moment reminded him that even in frustrating circumstances, there was space for calm, reflection, and preparation. Life had a way of testing patience, but it also offered moments of clarity. By the time the meal service began, Marcus felt a quiet readiness. He was prepared not just for the challenges of his flight, but for the steps he would take to ensure respect and dignity were upheld. The moment of denial had passed, but the principle it highlighted remained strong in his mind. As he took a sip of water and organized his notes for the meeting, Marcus leaned back with a sense of resolve. He was calm, focused, and determined. The journey was more than physical, it was a preparation for action, reflection, and the moment when fairness would be asserted. Marcus leaned back in his seat, watching the clouds drift past the airplane window. The soft glow of the cabin lights created a calm atmosphere, but his mind remained alert. He had spent the last hour observing the crew, passengers, and the subtle dynamics in the first-class cabin. The denial of his seat still lingered in his thoughts, but now, a sense of determination was growing stronger. He noticed one of the first-class attendants moving briskly, serving passengers with a practiced smile. But there was something in her body language, an avoidance, a hesitation whenever she looked in his direction. Marcus's instincts told him that this was not mere oversight, it was subtle disrespect. He had faced many moments like this before, in boardrooms, meetings, and social events. Small gestures often revealed the larger picture of attitude and behavior. As he observed quietly, a soft murmur of conversation reached him from the first-class cabin. Two attendants were speaking in hushed tones, glancing toward the economy section. Marcus caught a fragment of their words, enough to confirm what he suspected. They were laughing about the earlier incident, treating it as if it were insignificant or even amusing. A flash of disappointment surged in him, but he did not react impulsively. Marcus had always believed that calm action carried more weight than immediate anger. He knew that a hasty reaction might satisfy the momentary sting, but it would not create lasting change. Instead, he decided to plan carefully, considering the best way to address the situation. He picked up his phone and quietly opened his notes. Marcus began drafting a message, not to send immediately, but to organize his thoughts. "Respect and dignity are non-negotiable," he wrote. "Every individual deserves fair treatment, regardless of status or appearance." Typing these words made him feel more centered. He was not preparing to fight, he was preparing to act with purpose. Within minutes, Marcus instructed his assistant to connect him directly to the airline's management. His calm voice and clear explanation conveyed the seriousness of the situation. He described the events at the boarding gate, the behavior of the first-class attendants, and the subtle dismissal he had experienced. Every detail mattered. Marcus emphasized that this was not about a seat, it was about respect, fairness, and accountability. The assistant relayed his message promptly, and within moments, Marcus was speaking directly with the airline's regional manager. The manager listened attentively, assuring him that the matter would be addressed immediately. Marcus appreciated the professionalism in the voice on the other end of the line, but he remained focused. He knew that the situation required careful observation and decisive follow-up once the plane landed. Marcus returned to his seat, closing his laptop gently. He watched the flight attendants continue their service, their smiles still practiced but now slightly forced. Something had shifted, though they were unaware of the full extent. Their earlier casual disregard now carried a weight that they could not see. Marcus's quiet presence and composed demeanor spoke louder than any confrontation could. A young passenger nearby noticed the intensity of his gaze and offered a polite smile. Marcus returned it, grateful for small gestures of human connection. These moments reminded him that kindness existed even amid discomfort, and that observing carefully often revealed the true nature of people. As the plane cruised steadily at 30,000 feet, Marcus reflected on his experiences in life. He thought about times when he had faced challenges that seemed minor at first but carried deeper meaning. Each situation had required patience, understanding, and a clear mind. This was another moment of that kind, a test not of power, but of character. He took a slow breath and let his thoughts settle. The goal was not punishment, but accountability. Respect was not something to demand with anger, it was something to uphold thoughtfully and consistently. Marcus knew that when the time came, the right actions would speak louder than words, and those who had failed in their responsibilities would understand the consequences of their behavior. Meanwhile, the cabin continued its rhythm. Drinks were served, meals were arranged, and passengers tried to settle in for the journey. Marcus observed the subtle interactions, noting how some crew members were more attentive to certain passengers while avoiding others. Patterns emerged, and each detail added clarity to the larger picture of the situation he was facing. He opened his notebook again, writing down a few key points. Observe, document, communicate, and act wisely, he noted. These were the principles he had always followed. He did not act on impulse, he acted with purpose. Today, that purpose was clear: fairness and respect must be upheld, and those who ignored this principle needed to be held accountable. The sunlight began to filter through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the cabin. Marcus glanced outside, watching the sky change colors. The beauty of the moment reminded him that challenges often came with lessons. The moment of denial had been uncomfortable, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate calm, measured strength and to reinforce the values he believed in. 30 minutes into the flight, Marcus felt a sense of readiness. He had observed, reflected, and taken the first steps toward action. He was calm, focused, and deliberate. The flight attendants continued their routine, unaware of the quiet determination growing across the aisle. Marcus knew that soon, the moment would arrive when accountability would be enacted, not with anger, but with quiet authority. As the plane glided smoothly through the sky, Marcus leaned back in his seat and allowed himself a small smile. He had learned that patience, observation, and thoughtful action often carried the greatest power. The moment of disrespect would not be forgotten, but it would also not define him. He was ready to turn the situation into a lesson in fairness and dignity for himself, for the airline, and for anyone who might witness it. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, imagining the steps ahead. Calmness, clarity, and purpose guided him. The turning point had arrived, not yet in action, but in preparation. He would not let the small denial go unanswered, but he would ensure that when he acted, it was meaningful, fair, and final. Marcus sat quietly in his seat, his eyes calmly observing the cabin around him. Though outwardly composed, his mind was alert, tracking every small detail. The first-class crew moved efficiently among passengers, their smiles practiced and polite, but Marcus noticed subtle signs of tension. Something had shifted, even if they did not realize it yet. His assistant's earlier call to the airline's regional management had sparked action behind the scenes. Marcus did not need to know every step, but he could sense the quiet ripple of consequences forming. The denial of his first-class seat was no longer a minor inconvenience, it had become a matter that required attention and accountability. Around him, passengers continued their routines. Some read books, others scrolled through their devices, and a few were watching the view outside the window. Marcus appreciated their calmness. It reminded him that life continued, even amid unexpected challenges. But he also knew that fairness mattered, not only for himself but for anyone who might face similar situations in the future. Marcus opened his laptop again, reviewing notes for his upcoming meeting, but his attention occasionally drifted to the first-class cabin. He could see the crew serving drinks and meals, but their movements now seemed slightly constrained, as if the ease they had carried earlier was no longer entirely theirs. Subtle gestures, quick glances, hesitant smiles, and careful steps revealed a change in the atmosphere. Marcus observed without judgment, letting the situation unfold naturally. 30 minutes after the assistant's call, Marcus noticed one of the first-class attendants pause mid-step, looking around nervously. A faint flicker of realization passed over her face, though she tried to maintain her composure. Marcus understood immediately, the airline management had begun addressing the matter. The balance of authority was shifting, and accountability was moving quietly through the chain of command. Marcus leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He did not feel satisfaction or triumph, his goal was not revenge. Instead, he felt the calm assurance that fairness could be restored. Actions had been taken, and the moment of denial would no longer pass unrecognized. It was a quiet victory, one built on patience, observation, and deliberate action. He glanced around at other passengers, sensing their subtle awareness. Some were looking toward the first-class cabin, noticing small changes in demeanor. Others remained absorbed in their own activities. Marcus understood that not everyone would grasp the full context, but even the small ripple of awareness mattered. Moments like this could influence the environment, reminding people that respect and fairness were essential. Marcus closed his laptop and placed it on the tray table. He observed the crew again. The shift in their behavior was becoming more evident. Smiles appeared more controlled, movements more careful, and a faint tension filled the air. He could see that the airline's instructions were being implemented discreetly, yet decisively. Marcus felt a quiet sense of satisfaction in witnessing the change. He reflected on the nature of accountability. It was not about humiliation or anger, it was about responsibility and respect. The first-class attendants would face the consequences of their earlier behavior, but in a way that emphasized learning and correction rather than punishment alone. Marcus understood that true leadership required clarity, firmness, and a focus on principles rather than personal emotion. As the flight continued, Marcus observed small gestures from passengers around him. A few seemed curious about the unfolding tension, exchanging subtle glances. Others maintained their focus on reading or work. The scene reminded Marcus that life often moved forward while lessons quietly took hold. Accountability did not need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, the most powerful changes were those felt quietly, through awareness and thoughtful action. A young woman seated nearby offered him a polite smile and asked if he needed help with his tray table. Marcus returned the smile, feeling gratitude for the simple act. Even in moments of challenge and discomfort, kindness and human connection persisted. He noted silently that fairness and respect extended not only to major incidents but also to these small, meaningful interactions. The sun outside shifted slowly toward the horizon, casting golden light through the airplane windows. Marcus watched the colors ripple across the clouds and wings, appreciating the calm beauty of the moment. It reminded him that life offered balance, challenge and beauty, tension and tranquility. The incident in first class was a test, but the world outside continued in all its quiet splendor. 35 minutes into the flight, Marcus felt a quiet resolution. He had acted decisively yet calmly. He had observed patiently and communicated clearly. Now, the airline's management had taken immediate steps, and the first-class crew would face the consequences of their actions. Marcus felt no joy in their discomfort, only a firm satisfaction that fairness and dignity were being restored. As he leaned back in his seat, Marcus reflected on the importance of calm, deliberate action. Moments of disrespect could be painful, but they also offered opportunities to demonstrate strength, patience, and clarity. The quiet power of observing, planning, and acting thoughtfully often created the greatest impact, far beyond any emotional reaction or immediate satisfaction. Marcus opened his laptop one last time, reviewing his meeting notes with renewed focus. The incident in the cabin had shifted from irritation to preparation. He understood now that fairness was not merely a personal concern, it was a principle worth upholding for everyone. By acting thoughtfully, he had transformed a moment of discomfort into a lesson in accountability, respect, and dignity. The flight continued smoothly, the plane gliding above the clouds, and Marcus felt a quiet confidence settling over him. He had observed, reflected, and acted wisely. The immediate consequences were unfolding discreetly, yet decisively. The first-class crew would soon understand the seriousness of the situation, and fairness would be restored. Marcus leaned back, calm, focused, and quietly satisfied that justice, patience, and dignity had been honored. Marcus leaned back in his economy seat, glancing out the window at the endless sky. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the clouds in soft oranges and golds. There was a quiet beauty to the view, but Marcus's thoughts were far from the scenery. The events of the flight had left a mark on him, a mixture of frustration, determination, and reflection. He had observed the first-class crew carefully. Their subtle changes in behavior, their nervous glances, and their cautious steps were clear signs that his concerns had been noticed. The airline's management had taken immediate action, and the consequences were quietly beginning to unfold. Yet Marcus knew that the real lesson extended beyond the moment of the flight. Respect and fairness were principles that required constant attention, in every interaction and every decision. Marcus opened his laptop and typed notes for his meeting, but his mind wandered as he reflected on his journey to this point in life. He thought about the long hours, the sacrifices, and the challenges he had overcome. He remembered moments when others had doubted him, underestimated him, or treated him unfairly. Each time, he had learned to respond with patience and strategy rather than anger. Today was another test of the same principle, and he felt a quiet pride in how he had handled it. Around him, passengers continued their routines. Some read quietly, others watched the view outside, and a few tried to nap. Marcus appreciated the calmness of the cabin. Even amid tension, life continued. The moment of denial was fleeting, but its impact could last if handled wisely. He believed that the way one responded to injustice, whether large or small, revealed true character. Marcus glanced toward the first-class cabin again. The attendants were still moving efficiently, but the earlier confidence and ease had changed. Their polite smiles now seemed slightly forced, and their careful steps revealed an awareness of accountability. Marcus did not feel joy in their discomfort. His satisfaction came from knowing that fairness was being restored. This was not about punishment, it was about ensuring that respect mattered, no matter one's position or appearance. He closed his laptop and let his thoughts flow freely. He reflected on the power of quiet action. Often, people assumed that justice required loud confrontation, yet Marcus knew the opposite. True influence came from calm observation, thoughtful decision-making, and measured response. By acting wisely, he had ensured that the situation would be addressed meaningfully, without unnecessary conflict or drama. A young woman seated nearby offered him a polite smile as she adjusted her seat. Marcus returned it with a small nod. These small gestures reminded him that fairness and respect extended to everyday human interactions, not only to significant events. He made a mental note to always value these small acts. They were as important as any major decision he faced. Marcus also thought about the passengers who might have witnessed the earlier denial at the boarding gate. Did they understand what had happened? Would they see that fairness could prevail even in uncomfortable circumstances? He hoped that the quiet way he had handled the situation might inspire others to act thoughtfully in their own lives, emphasizing principle over emotion. As the flight continued, Marcus reflected on the balance between patience and action. Some moments required immediate response, while others demanded careful preparation. Today's situation had required the latter. By observing, documenting, and communicating through the proper channels, he had ensured that the airline would act responsibly. His quiet vigilance had turned a personal frustration into a meaningful lesson in accountability. He opened his notebook and began writing a brief reflection. True strength lies in patience, clarity, and measured action. Respect is not optional, and fairness must be upheld quietly but firmly. Actions speak louder than words, and integrity is shown not in anger but in thoughtfulness. Writing these words helped him process the experience fully, turning the emotional tension into purposeful insight. Marcus glanced out the window again. The clouds now glowed in soft pink and purple tones. The beauty of the sky reminded him that life always offered moments of calm, even amid challenges. It was a reminder that perspective mattered. While the denial of his seat had caused initial frustration, he had transformed the experience into an opportunity to demonstrate dignity, strength, and careful action. He also reflected on the importance of setting an example. Leadership was not only about guiding a company or making business decisions, it was about embodying values that others could respect and follow. By acting calmly and thoughtfully, Marcus had shown that fairness was non-negotiable and that dignity must be upheld in every interaction. As the sun began to set completely, casting long shadows across the cabin, Marcus leaned back, feeling a quiet sense of completion. The immediate steps had been taken, the airline's management had responded, and the first-class crew would face accountability. Yet more importantly, Marcus had used the experience to reaffirm his own principles: patience, observation, calm action, and the quiet power of integrity. For the remainder of the flight, Marcus allowed himself to relax. He reviewed his notes for the meeting, appreciating the focus and clarity that the earlier tension had inspired. The incident had been challenging, but it had also strengthened his resolve and reinforced the importance of fairness in all areas of life. Marcus knew that when he stepped off the plane, the next phase of the day awaited him: his meeting, his responsibilities, and the continuation of his journey. Yet for now, at 35,000 feet, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had turned a moment of discomfort into a lesson in dignity and accountability, quietly demonstrating that respect was not something to demand angrily, but something to uphold thoughtfully and consistently. The clouds drifted by as Marcus leaned back, calm and confident, ready for whatever came next. Marcus felt the plane begin its slow descent, the gentle vibration through the cabin signaling the approach to the airport. He adjusted his seat belt and glanced around, observing passengers preparing for landing. Some neatly stored their belongings, while others gazed out the windows at the approaching city below. The bright lights reflected softly on the airplane's wings, creating a serene glow. He thought about the events that had unfolded during the flight. The initial denial of his first-class seat, the subtle disrespect, and the quiet determination he had exercised, it all culminated in this final stretch of the journey. Marcus knew that the resolution was close, and he felt a calm confidence. Patience, observation, and thoughtful action had carried him through. The first-class attendants moved with careful efficiency, still aware of the subtle change in the atmosphere. Marcus noticed their slightly tense movements, their polite smiles now accompanied by caution. They did not know that the airline's management had acted on his complaint and that accountability was already in motion. The subtle ripple of consequences was already shaping their behavior, and Marcus observed it quietly. He reflected on the meaning of fairness. True fairness, he thought, was not simply a reward for status or position. It was about dignity, respect, and the understanding that every person deserved equitable treatment. The airline had recognized this, responding decisively yet discreetly. Marcus appreciated the balance. It was not about humiliation or public spectacle, it was about action guided by principle. As the plane descended further, Marcus glanced at other passengers. Some had noticed the subtle shift in the cabin's energy. A few exchanged curious glances, perhaps sensing that something significant had occurred. Yet most remained absorbed in their own thoughts and routines. Marcus knew that fairness often worked quietly, influencing others without dramatic displays. It was in these subtle, meaningful actions that true lessons were taught. A flight attendant passed by his seat with a tray, offering water and snacks. Marcus smiled politely and thanked her. Small gestures of kindness, even amid tense circumstances, reminded him that human connection persisted everywhere. These moments were important. They reflected the core values he held close: respect, empathy, and understanding. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and your belongings secured." Marcus leaned back slightly, appreciating the smooth professionalism of the crew. Despite earlier tension, the flight had remained safe, orderly, and efficient. He valued this calm competence. It mirrored the careful approach he had taken throughout the situation. As the wheels touched the runway, a soft thud resonated through the cabin. Marcus glanced around, watching passengers adjust and prepare for disembarkation. The city lights reflected off the windows, and he could see the orderly movement of ground crew below. The final stage of the journey was unfolding, and with it, the resolution of the earlier conflict. Soon, the first-class attendants were discreetly informed of the airline management's decision. They would be removed from the flight upon landing, and an internal review would follow. Marcus observed silently, noting the professionalism with which the instructions were carried out. Their faces revealed subtle signs of humility and awareness, a quiet recognition of the consequences of their earlier actions. Marcus did not feel pleasure in their discomfort. Instead, he felt satisfaction that fairness and respect were being restored. The principle had been upheld without unnecessary drama. He had acted with clarity and patience, and the airline had responded responsibly. This quiet demonstration of accountability reinforced his belief that principled action always yielded meaningful results. Passengers began to gather their belongings as the plane taxied toward the gate. Some glanced toward Marcus, offering small nods or polite smiles. He returned them quietly, appreciating the subtle recognition. The flight had been more than a journey from one city to another. It had been a lesson in observation, calm action, and the importance of standing firm in one's values. As the plane came to a complete stop, the cabin doors opened, and the first-class attendants began their exit. Marcus watched, composed and thoughtful. They moved silently, no dramatic gestures, only quiet acknowledgement of the process. The moment had passed, but the lesson remained clear: fairness mattered, and accountability was inevitable when principles were ignored. Marcus stood, collected his briefcase, and adjusted his suit. The other passengers were moving toward the exit, some nodding toward him subtly, recognizing the quiet strength and dignity he had maintained throughout. He felt a sense of calm accomplishment. The situation could have led to anger or frustration, but instead, it had become an opportunity to demonstrate measured action and integrity. As he stepped off the plane, Marcus reflected on the events of the flight. He had faced a moment of disrespect and transformed it into a lesson in patience, observation, and thoughtful action. He had maintained his dignity, ensured accountability, and quietly reminded others of the importance of fairness. The experience had strengthened his resolve and reaffirmed his belief in the power of calm, purposeful action. Outside the terminal, Marcus's car awaited. The lights of the city shimmered against the evening sky, and he felt ready for the next steps of his day. The business meeting, the responsibilities, and the challenges ahead were important, but he carried with him the quiet assurance that integrity and principle always guided his actions. As he drove toward his destination, Marcus allowed himself a small, reflective smile. The flight had been more than a journey, it had been a demonstration of strength, patience, and fairness. He had turned a moment of denial into a meaningful lesson, proving that calm, thoughtful action could influence outcomes and inspire respect. The experience remained with him, a reminder that dignity and fairness were not optional but essential. Marcus had acted wisely, and the resolution was now complete. Accountability had been restored, and the lesson of respect extended beyond the airplane cabin, reaching quietly into the lives of everyone who had witnessed or participated in the events. Marcus leaned back in his seat and exhaled slowly. The journey had ended, but the lesson would remain. Marcus stepped out of the airport terminal, his briefcase in hand, and took a deep breath of the evening air. The city lights shimmered across the streets, casting a gentle glow on the pavement. The flight was behind him, but the experience lingered in his mind not as frustration, but as a lesson in dignity, fairness, and thoughtful action. The taxi that awaited him pulled up quietly, and he climbed in, feeling the smooth leather of the seat beneath him. As the car drove through the city streets, Marcus reflected on the events of the flight. The denial of his first-class seat could have been a moment of anger, a test of temper or patience. But he had chosen calm observation, careful planning, and deliberate action. The airline had responded, accountability had been addressed, and fairness had been restored. He thought about the first-class crew, now removed from the flight and facing the airline's internal review. Marcus did not feel triumph over them. Instead, he felt a quiet hope that they would learn from the experience, that fairness and respect would become central to their actions in the future. True change, he knew, came not from humiliation but from understanding the importance of principles and responsibility. As the city passed by in a blur of lights and motion, Marcus considered the passengers who had observed the earlier events. Some had exchanged glances, sensing the subtle tension and eventual shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Though they may not have understood every detail, Marcus knew the lesson had quietly reached them: fairness mattered, and even small moments of respect or disrespect could have consequences. The car turned onto a quieter street, and Marcus felt a sense of calm satisfaction. Life often presented moments that tested patience, character, and integrity. Today's flight had been one such test, and he had navigated it with care and composure. In business, in leadership, and in life, he had learned that calm, thoughtful action often spoke louder than anger or confrontation. He reflected on the power of observation. Watching, noticing small gestures, and understanding behavior had been key to his ability to respond effectively. Marcus believed that much of life's wisdom came from noticing what others overlooked. In this flight, small details, the shift in the crew's demeanor, the nervous glances, the subtle tension, had told him everything he needed to know. The taxi slowed as they approached the office where Marcus's meeting would take place. He adjusted his suit, straightened his tie, and prepared mentally to transition from reflection to action. The flight was over, but the lessons remained vivid in his mind. He understood that integrity was not only about responding in a single moment, it was a continuous practice, woven into every decision, every interaction, and every choice. Marcus recalled the notes he had written during the flight, thoughts about patience, dignity, and accountability. He reviewed them silently in his mind. Respect is earned and expected. Fairness is not optional. Quiet, thoughtful action has the power to inspire change. These words were more than reflections, they were guiding principles he intended to live by, in both personal and professional life. As he entered the building, Marcus was greeted by colleagues and assistants, all aware of the high-profile meeting ahead. He felt prepared, focused, and grounded. The earlier incident on the flight no longer weighed on him as frustration, it had become fuel for purpose and clarity. He understood that leadership was as much about moral strength as it was about business strategy. During the meeting, Marcus carried himself with calm confidence. His thoughts were organized, his presentation clear, and his demeanor composed. Colleagues and clients alike noticed the quiet authority in his presence, a sense that he had faced challenges and handled them with integrity and intelligence. The flight, the subtle conflict, and the resolution all contributed to the inner calm that now guided him. Later, as the day wound down, Marcus took a quiet moment alone in his office. He reflected on how the incident had transformed from a personal slight into a broader lesson about accountability, respect, and dignity. He understood that moments of unfairness often carried opportunity, the chance to demonstrate values, inspire change, and reinforce the principles that defined character. He also thought about sharing his experience, not in anger or blame, but as an example. Stories like this could remind others that dignity, patience, and thoughtful action had real power. Marcus believed that by modeling calm, principled response, he could inspire others to handle challenges with strength and fairness, influencing not only individuals but systems of behavior in workplaces, communities, and beyond. As night fell over the city, Marcus looked out the window, reflecting on the journey from frustration to resolution. He understood that fairness and respect were not just abstract ideals, they were daily choices, demonstrated in moments both large and small. The flight had been a microcosm of life itself, unexpected challenges, subtle tension, careful observation, and meaningful action. Marcus packed his thoughts, closed his briefcase, and prepared to leave the office. The day had been long, but it was also a reminder that strength was measured not by confrontation, but by calm, consistent action and the courage to uphold principles. He carried this lesson forward, confident that each decision he made would reflect the values he had reinforced today. As he stepped outside into the quiet night, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The flight, the denial, the careful response, and the resolution were all part of a larger journey, one in which respect, fairness, and dignity were non-negotiable. He had acted wisely, observed carefully, and ensured accountability. The experience had left its mark, not as anger or frustration, but as clarity, strength, and integrity. With calm determination, Marcus walked toward the next chapter of his day, ready to face challenges, make decisions, and continue leading with fairness, patience, and unwavering respect for all. The flight was over, but the lesson remained. True strength lay in principled action, thoughtful response, and the quiet power of integrity.